So many times you turn in a paper, like let's say the paper's supposed to be 3 pages and the paper's only 2 pages, and you know it's short and I know it's short and it's not so good, right? So this lecture is going to be about how to expand on what you have. Of course, there are lots of not so good ways to expand on your paper that students try all the time. They try to use like really long quotes, or they fool around with the spacing so that they shrink so the paper's margins get bigger and bigger, or they go on tangents and they write about something that's kind of vaguely connected to the paper but not really, and it kind of is meant to fill up space. And there's lots of more tricks. And your instructor knows all the tricks and they're not impressed by any of them. So those are the not good ways to expand on your paper, to get it to 3 pages or 2 pages or 6 pages or 10 pages, whatever you're trying to do. So I want to talk about something that will help in an authentic way. So this is an actual Writing 115 paper that a student turned in, and he gave me permission to use it, to talk about it. It's a second assignment, and the assignment is to write a proposal for changes in a police department, either in Portland or somewhere else in the U.S. This is a great paper. I mean, it's fine. But I want to show you how he might have expanded upon it to make it an even better paper. So what I do is I look for the parts in the paper that are stale or predictable or kind of obvious, or I've read like 16 times already. And then I'm looking for the parts in the paper that are very unique to that writer, and those are the parts that I'm looking to expand on. So I'm like reading along, sort of trying to find. So this student here, their proposal is going to focus on 2 factors, and these factors are stop and frisk and unchecked use of force by officers. Several students in any class write about unchecked use of force by officers. So in and of itself, his focus isn't that interesting, but maybe he does some interesting things with it. So I keep reading, and he talks first about stop and frisk. Stop and frisk isn't used by that many police departments. Even in New York City where it wasn't used consistently. It depends on who's in charge of the city. So a part of me is not that into the stop and frisk part just because it's not that relevant to most police departments. So I'm reading along, reading about stop and frisk. Then he moves into de-escalation, holding officers accountable. And as we move, I'm starting to get a little bit more interested. 34 states do not require any type of de-escalation training. So I'm already more interested than I was when I was reading the stop and frisk part. I keep reading. And if he's going to talk about stop and frisk, it's good that he talks about it at the beginning, because now he's moving into more interesting territory. And then I get to what I see as probably the most interesting part of the paper. So I'm going to change colors to indicate that. One of the things he does is he brings in a counter-argument to what he's arguing. A common argument against de-escalation is that it somehow leaves police more vulnerable or less able to protect themselves. And now he totally has me hooked to talk about what other people are going to say in response to your paper. It's excellent. And especially, this is a Writing 115 paper. Students in Writing 115 don't usually do that. In Writing 122, it would be quite common, but not this early in the game. So here, I'm totally engaged. And then he says, it turns out that de-escalation leads to safer encounters for both the police and the people they interact with. So it doesn't actually leave the police more vulnerable, it actually creates a more safe environment. And this here, you'll notice that he sort of goes on, he sort of leaves this behind. And this is the part that I wish he expanded upon. I want to hear, for example, maybe a little bit more from the opposition about why they feel it leaves the police vulnerable. And certainly I want to hear more about how de-escalation leads to safer environments for the police and citizens. He kind of races through this in 2 sentences, and I imagine that this could be expanded at least 2 more sentences, maybe an entire other paragraph. So what I've done is I've found like the kernel or the hottest, most interesting part. And as he expands on this, simultaneously, like you guys think that once you throw something inside a paper, it has to stay there. But I'm actually suggesting a different process, that as you expand on the best part, the other parts that are kind of okay, maybe reduce them little by little, and maybe even sometimes take them out of your paper. So it's a 2-part process. Expand the good parts and shrink the obvious parts. Okay? So I never ever see that. I rarely ever see that. And so who can help you find the kernels? Sometimes you know, and then sometimes you need an outside person. And so your instructor can help, a writing tutor in one of the writing centers can help. If you just say to them, what's the best part of my paper, they'll be able to tell you for sure. Okay, so most of the time, I'd have to say 70–80% of the time, I can find this part in any paper that gets turned in, the part that is just better than the rest. Sometimes, I just read some final exams, and there were some final exams where it all was kind of stale. The whole exam was, they only had 48 hours to write it. Maybe that was the problem. They didn't have time to be, but I don't think that was really the problem, because other students turned in exams that were much more interesting. So sometimes from the outset, if you approach a question in a very standard, stereotypical way, then all you get is blandness. So besides looking for the really juicy part of your writing, the second thing is that when you start out, ask yourself, what's the original, fresh, unusual, not typical way that I can approach this question? Especially, so oftentimes an instructor will give 4 different possible questions, and almost everyone's going to gravitate towards these 2. And it's pretty obvious, like, oh, all the students are going to write on these 2 here. If you're going to write also on these 2, then it's more incumbent on you to try to find a fresh take, because I'm going to be reading like 20 papers about the same, they're going to take the same tactic. So that is just something you need to think about from the beginning. Okay, so think about what's fresh from the very beginning, what's stale. And then the second thing is look for, once you have a draft, look for the part that's really good and the other parts that you can slowly kind of weed out. Okay, try it. I'll help you. Other teachers will help you. Good luck.